Hi, everyone. And yeah, welcome to this presentation of results really from task 2. So this is a bit of a glimpse of the results and the output of task 2.1. So I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of where this sort of sits in the project. So task 2.1 has at its main output a framework that is called Holistic Policy and Innovation Evaluation Framework. So this is a framework that is indicator-based and looks to assess the sustainability of the scenarios that we're using or developing in the project, the future systems that we're looking at, but also policies. And this is something that we want to use both in the project, but also to make available to be for it to be used outside of the project. So this framework builds on the core concepts that we've talked about before, and that Launch has presented as well. The SAFA, coming from the SAFA guidelines, the sustainability trade-offs, then the leverage points concept from Epson and others building on Donella Meadows' work, and then the One Welfare concept as well. And these also we used in the 2.1 reviews that we're talking about today. So the dimensions that we look at in task 2.1 are three. We're looking at past, present, and future. And the literature review that I'm going to talk about today is sitting at looking at the outcomes or the impacts of past EU policies. So the questions we were talking about were what impacts did these policies have on the livestock sector's sustainability and how they have been implemented. Then the present, which we're not really talking about, well, we are talking about it today, but this was more done through like a stakeholder interview approach that we're still analyzing at the moment. So this will come a bit later. And then the other thing that we're talking about today that Elsa will be talking about is the policy analysis. And this looked very much at the currently upcoming policies and what objectives they have with regard to the different sustainability indicators. And all of this, what we're gathering here, so both from the past and the current analysis, we will use in to inform this evaluation framework, to see the gaps maybe as well that we have in current policy, and to also feed into the scenario work. So I'm going to talk about the lit review now, and this has started pretty much in the beginning of the whole task. So that's something that's been ongoing since the end of 2021, really, and we've worked with sources from Web of Science and from Cordis, which is an output of EU projects publications. This is a very big table, but basically in the end we ended up with 60 studies that were included in the review, and that was narrowed down a lot, but that was studies that were focusing actually on livestock production and that were also focusing on the impacts of policy specifically. When we look at what years are we covering, so we included studies from that were published from 2012 initially, but then this was the reason why there's no publication from 2012 here is that we then also looked at what the time frame that was actually considered in the study. So looking at studies that really look at data that was at least half after 2012, which is why we see this picture here. And of the 60 studies that are included, 80% were published between 2019 and 2022, which you can see here. And this is also aligning with the aim of the review, which was focusing more on recent developments and livestock policies. If we look at the breakdown per country from where what these studies are talking about, most of them were on an EU level. We're not specifically looking at certain countries or even regions in those countries, but then followed by a bigger group of publications from Germany, a lot on Ireland, on dairy production, Spain as well, the UK. And when we look at this, what livestock is discussed or the impacts on what livestock species is discussed, Cattle does make up the largest share here, split into dairy and beef. Then general livestock, discussing it more broadly, basically. And then the lowest share we've seen here is for poultry. The way we have structured this review was, as I've said, along those three core concepts of pathways. So looking at leverage points, the SAFA guidelines, and One Welfare, and what we've seen. So yeah, feel free to look at this maybe in the deliverable later on, but this is just how we basically used it in the review. But looking at what themes are covered by the papers, and sorry, this is a number of papers that we see here that isn't labeled on the axis. But we see that the SAFA guidelines, so those are those four in the middle, the economic, environment, social, and governance. Those topics are represented most, also because it is probably very widespread, easily applicable concept of sustainability in those categories. And we see that only few papers really discuss the leverage points or topics, aspects of the leverage points in their studies. So looking a bit more into the different impacts more into the results really that we've seen on the different categories and sustainability aspects. Yeah, we're looking at environmental impacts first. So what has been one outcome of the analysis is that that we've seen the intensification of farming systems as a result of EU policies. This is then again linked to especially the intensification of extensive systems and looking at grazing systems in Spain and Portugal, for example, and seeing an increased risk here of environmental degradation due to this intensification. Then the intensification is also a topic in dairy farming, especially when looking at the removal of milk quotas. And this was related to increased manure output, which again is related to impacts on eutrophication and also greenhouse gas emissions. But we also see that a study found that the emission intensity of dairy farms after dairy quotas were removed decreased. And this was explained by farms being more efficient and therefore having lower greenhouse gas emissions basically per kilogram of milk. At the same time, we've seen growing herds of dairy cattle in some areas, but this is very heterogeneous within the EU. So I think we'll come back to this later again. Then another focus area of this environmental impacts was manure and manure treatment, and finding that there are many EU policies that actually deal with different aspects of manure management and treatment, but that a comprehensive piece of legislation that is combining the different parts is missing, which can create the impression of an ever-changing legislative landscape, basically, which can result in low compliance. For agri-environmental payments, this was discussed with the potential to increase environmentally friendly practices, but also at the same time mentioning the constraints that payments often are too low, or that eligibility criteria are too narrow for many parts of the EU, so that farmers are basically excluded from these measures if they cannot comply with eligibility criteria. And then maybe here as well, we've seen that the reduction of livestock numbers and a change towards plant-based diets was also discussed by some authors of the review, but this wasn't a focus area really of studies. Looking at social impact, so this was something that we've seen discussed here, was topics like food security, knowledge, public opinion, and food security, especially relating to being formulated as a challenge to balance self-sufficiency in production and the environmental impacts related to livestock production mainly. Then knowledge and skill were discussed in terms of it can both be a motivation when maybe converting to organic farming, but it's also pointed out that a lack of knowledge or a lack of skill, or maybe an understanding of biological processes as well, can become an obstacle for complying with some legislation, and that training is an important factor here if for policies to be implemented. Then public opinion and awareness for public opinion by farmers is also something that was discussed in terms of both creating pressure, but also allowing for being an incentive for farmers to maybe change and to be a motivator. But also the lack of labeling for certain attributes. Maybe as an obstacle again, because that could increase transparency from the consumer side. Then closely linked here, identity and succession. This is something that was discussed as something, identity farming is and livestock farming perceived as a desirable lifestyle in many cases, but that it really relies on subsidies in many cases to actually keep going, and that is then also reflected in succession planning, which is often affected by economic constraints, but also by administrative burdens maybe when new legislation comes in, and to comply with new legislation. Animal welfare was discussed both in terms of sort of positive developments that have been made over the decade, but also discussing it with still challenges and still lacking regulations in some areas, but generally an increased awareness for it. On the sides of economic impacts, we see that especially farm structural changes have been observed over the past decades, and that they are often also described for extensive grazing systems. Then we see a very sort of different types of developments in different areas of the EU. So sometimes a concentration of production in bigger farms, but also in some areas also a decline in livestock production. And here's something maybe to point out again is decreasing dairy herds in the EU member states after the quota removal, but some herds also increased, like the Netherlands, Ireland, and Belgium, what's pointed out here. When we look at reasons why we don't have a sustainable livestock sector in the EU yet. So this is something that came from the literature as well. Some areas like lack of regulation, so that for some animal welfare issues or for some environmental protection, that there was not the detailed regulation, or that there was not the as I've pointed out with the manure legislation, not the comprehensive piece to bringing it together. Then another thing related to regulation is that often there are no concrete targets, or the targets are inconsistent. So we have not really measurable targets, or sort of broader one size fits all conditions that are not really regionally specific. Then also lack of enforcement, which can be linked to non-compliance costs, which are too low, also maybe related to manure, and this then being kind of unfair on smaller farms, but also some lack of willingness that some authors criticize, especially when we looked at animal welfare. To conclude, we found that the literature talks of a trend of intensification and of simplification, but again, this is not the same everywhere. That we then have farming identity that is something desirable, but that often it needs to be supported, and that farm support and farm payments, that they help to stabilize food production and rural communities as well. And then, as I've pointed out before, different areas of delays and reasons for delays. And when we looked a bit more at sort of the higher scale or the higher level of sustainability metrics that these papers use, then we find that that the restructure one is the one that is looked at most. So basically, changing changing regulation rather than really overcoming and completely shifting norms and values, which is maybe something that we find a bit when looked at reducing the livestock numbers or shifting to a plant-based diet or something, but generally lower discussion of really big system change in these papers. Yeah. Thank you. That is the literature side. I don't know if we want to take questions now or if we should give the word to Elsa first to make sure she has the time as well that she needs, and then move forward with questions after that.
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
Okay, great. Elsa, can you share your screen?
Yeah, I'm going to do it right now. Yeah. Can you see the PowerPoint?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. It's full screen, it's good? Okay.
Looks good.
Yeah, so I'm going to do the policy side. I think Nina said enough on the introduction or the frame of our work, so I will try to go straight to the point. For my part, so I review the current policy framework. It was 13 documents, directives and regulations that were published between 1991 with the nitrate directives and 2011 with the environmental impact assessment directive. As you can see, there are different kinds of directives. Some of them target specifically animals, like animal transport, directive on broilers, on slaughters, but others are more general, and it seems relevant to include them because they indirectly also have an impact on livestock sector. So that was for the current policy framework, and for the future, we review strategic direction written by the European Commission in strategies documents. So I published a lot of documents since 2018, like the Farm to Fork, bioeconomic strategy, etc. And how I worked is like I read all these documents and I filled up an Excel document, the same as the one used by Nina for the literature review. So it was with the same main concept on leverage points, environment, economy, etc. What I'm going to do during this presentation is first I'm going to present you the main conclusions from the analysis of the current framework. It's quite linked to what Nina just said and the failures of this policy framework to regulate the livestock sectors. After, I will show you the way the European Commission understands the failures of the livestock sector, so what is pointed out by the European Commission in these strategies, and I will present you the targets and the policy proposal put on the table by the European Commission to improve the situation. So what we can say about the current policy framework is, like, as Nina said, it doesn't really regulate well the sector. So on feeding, for example, there is no recommendation on the source or type of feed given to the animals. It's only technical requirements on the shape, the size of feeding facilities, for example, and really general recommendations such as the need to provide a wholesome diet to farmed animals. Only the feed additives regulation mentioned the fact that it could contribute to animal welfare or environmental sustainability, but once again, there is no targets, thresholds, or recommendations. So it's really vague recommendations, which are not really applied, moreover. On animal welfare, it's where there are the most elements, but I think it's also important to put it into context. These animal welfare directives were published in the early 2000s, so it follows the health and sanitary crisis in the 1990s. So the goal of these directives is not so much to improve animal welfare, but to prevent another sanitary crisis. So it sets minimum standards on how animals must be housed, stocked, and fed, but these standards are really low, according to a lot of NGOs. On the environment, there are two kinds of directives. There are kind of preemptive directive, which are supposed to realize, like really intensive farms are supposed to realize impact assessment before being built. and also some other industries must grant a permit, like in order to receive a permit, they must comply to the best available technique. And there are also other directives on manure management, but on the 3 directives that we reviewed, only one, the nitrate directive, directly mentioned the livestock sectors, the Water Framework Directive and the Directive on National Emission Ceilings, even if they mention phosphates, ammonium, and a third one, it doesn't, and phosphate, ammonium, and nitrates, it doesn't explicitly mention the livestock. But in order to achieve the goal of the Water Framework Directive, to have water in good condition, it's supposed an action on the livestock sectors. So as it was said before, the regulations right now is not really ambitious. It doesn't allow the sector to be sustainable, and this is acknowledged by the European Commission. So I'm going to be quite fast here because I think the observation are shared by everyone and none by everyone, but it's just interesting to stress the fact that it is also written by the European Commission and acknowledged. For example, the contribution of the livestock sector to greenhouse gas emissions, or the important share of agricultural land and cropland used by the livestock sector, the consumption of water, and the pollutions which is due to it. On health, I found it really interesting to underline the fact that on the Farm to Fork strategy, it is clearly stated that a more plant-based diet with less red and processed meat and more fruits and vegetables will both reduce risk of life-threatening disease and improve the environmental impact of the food system. So it's really the One Health principle that a better health for human, animals, and the environmental. It's linked, and it's clearly stated that we need to eat less meat rather than processed. On animal welfare, there is no explicit acknowledgement of the failures, but rather the European Commission stresses several times the need to improve it, so implicitly acknowledges that there are problems. And on socioeconomic issues, it doesn't target specifically the livestock sectors, but it's more a general understanding of the fact that farmers are less educated, and also farmers are aging population, as there is only 11% of EU farmers that were under 40 in 2016. However, despite all these failures, there in all the targets set by the European Commission, only one objective specifically targets the livestock sector, the fact to reduce by 50% by 2030 antimicrobials sales for farm animals and aquacultures. There are several other targets, mainly in the Farm to Fork and the biodiversity strategy, in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to improve air, soil, and water quality, but there is no mention of the livestock sector, despite its centrality, as we just seen, and also there is no targets related to food consumption. So here some example of the targets. So the fact, for example, to achieve 25% of organic farming, or to reduce by 50% the use of chemical pesticides, as 70% of agricultural land are used for the livestock sector. It seems a bit impossible to achieve these targets without an ambitious action on the livestock sector. But once again, there is no precise targets. Here, the policy proposals advanced by the European Commission. So they propose to revise a certain numbers of directives, such as industrial emission directives, or the sustainable use of pesticide directives. They also propose new kind of policies, such as the certification for carbon removal. It should push farmers to develop practices to remove carbon. On organic farming, it's mainly through better information to consumer, investment in research, and for animal welfare, it's maybe where the European Commission is the most ambitious. There are, on one side, labeling and soft law measures, but also they propose to ban the use of cages. It follows a European Citizens Initiative, and it will maybe be put in place in 2027. So what was difficult in assessing the future of the policy framework regulating the livestock sector is the fact that all these measures are debated right now. And we can see in the current debate within the Council on the Industrial Emission Directive or on the sustainable use of pesticides, for example, how the Council tried to really drag down the measures proposed by the Commissions. So it's really difficult to assess the level of ambitions. But what we can say, however, in conclusion is the fact that the European Commission clearly understands the failings of the livestock sectors, that the current legislation is too weak to ensure the sustainability of livestock farming. However, as said by Nina, like the change proposed by the Commission right now are really marginal. And also what is interesting, we did kind of we tried to analyze the conceptual framework of the European Commission, what kind of solutions it proposed most. And the fact is that the European Commission has really a technicist vision. It proposed technical solutions, like the fact to have innovative feed additives that will modify the physical chemical characteristics of manure, the fact to have anaerobic digestion producing biogas or nitrification inhibitors. So it's really on mainly the solutions proposed are technical, and so there is no need to reduce or to change our habits, our diets, so no actions on diets except from some marketing, and also no real action or willingness to reduce the animal numbers, even if it seems necessary. So yeah, I will stop. I think we are already, there is no more time. I hope it was quite clear, and yeah, invite you to read the report. I think that it's more detailed and the English is better also. So yeah, thank you for listening.
We can open the floor for any questions.
Yeah, I have a question. Maybe just a remark. When you say that the EU policy is not very ambitious and not having very many concrete things about livestock, then I'm wondering why are the EU policy having so big problems of being implemented at this moment in some countries, especially for the livestock, where in Denmark and in the Netherlands and also other countries, we actually have to reduce livestock to be able to comply to the EU policy, especially the nitrate directive.
Yeah, I think the nitrate directive is by far the most ambitious policies proposed by the EU, and it's the one which poses the main problems. But except from this one, I don't know, Nina, maybe academics have more answers.
Yeah, maybe specifically for the nitrates directive, this was there was a paper that actually looked at this specifically and looked at the costs for non-compliance, and they concluded that for the big polluters, so that was talking about mainly about Germany, pig producing regions, and looking at the pollution from them and the costs that farmers there faced as non-compliant fees, basically, that they were for them still that those were costs that they could actually pay and that they would pay, and basically not make big changes, so that the non-compliance was basically too easy still to really make change necessary for those farms. But that was the bigger polluters that had where basically the margin was that was marginally not a big cost for them to pay these fees. But that was one study that was in the review.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to stress that the nitrate directives is really the exception in terms of ambition in the policies and the norm.
But also I know that in Denmark we're having problems in compliance with the livestock demands for room for the sows, and they're not being bound for the sows is also a big problem in Denmark, and I think also in other countries this must be. This is also an EU policy, isn't it? It's strange that it doesn't come up.
No, in the review it comes up that low implementation of animal welfare is a problem, but it doesn't really, it hasn't come out, why. Just that it is not enforced enough.
There's another question, Adam.
Yes, I have just a short question because I don't have I don't see the discussion on the EU level about the nitrogen pollutions compared to the organic carbon level in soil, because depends of the organic carbon level in soil, we have the nitrogen pollution on agrarian land, or we don't have it. And I don't see the discussion on that kind of subject. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm not sure this was something that actually came out in the review specifically. I don't know, Elsa, if you have something on this?
No, I'm not sure I understood quite well the question. Was but organic soil?
No, I don't mean organic soil. I mean organic and conventional soil, because we have all agrarian land, depends on the method of production. We have also in conventional soil the different level of organic carbon, not soil, carbon. I mean the level of the humus in soil, because when we have a higher level of humus in soil, we don't have that huge impact of nitrogen pollution to the water, for instance. When we have the carbon level in soil very low, if we have some pollution, nitrogen pollution, come to the agrarian land, we have huge impact. And I don't see any discussion about this in EU level.
No, it didn't come up in the policy reviews.
Are there any other questions? Comments? Confusion? I don't think so. Okay, so as I mentioned, the recording will be available in the future when after their conclusions on the results of the policy review have been shared and published elsewhere. So thank you again, Nina and Elsa. And if there's other suggestions for pathway seminars, I believe we still have a vacancy open for the March seminar. So feel free to forward me any suggestions. If not, I will be in touch, I'm sure, with you bilaterally to see how we can, who can present during the next seminar. So the EB meeting will take place at 1:30, and I wish you all a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.